At MedStory, we take privacy seriously and follow all healthcare privacy laws. Some details may be changed to protect confidentiality. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views of their employer.
I was so busy, so overwhelmed, so stressed. I had so much going on that I was sort of missing out on the one thing that I had been so grateful for.
Welcome back to the MedStory podcast, where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm Spencer Locke, and on today's episode, how Dr. Sandra Fernandes learned how to redefine success and rediscover herself beyond the white coat. You see, she thought that burnout was just part of being a doctor, until the moment her relief told her the truth. Sandra immigrated from Portugal as a child, the first in her family to go to college. Medicine was supposed to be her family's dream, finally realized. This was until the pressures of work and motherhood collided. She faced burnout not once, but twice, each time questioning whether medicine had a space for humanity. Her story challenges what it means to heal, not just others, but herself as well. From a child translating her parents' doctor's appointments to a physician searching for balance, Dr. Fernandes' journey is one of resilience, reinvention, and reclaiming purpose. And that, my friends, is where our story really begins. When was it in your life that you knew that you wanted to become a doctor?
Oh, so I was not one of those people that kind of grew up and was like, this is absolutely what I want to do. It took a little bit of time to evolve, and I think it was sort of a mix of experiences that culminated in this path. I would say probably when I was in college and I really started trying some different things out, and that's kind of when I realized, okay, this is the path that I want to do. But a big part of that had a lot to do with also this, I want to say this sense that I got, I don't want to say family pressures, but sort of these internal pressures. And some of it was family-based around what success looked like and what I should be doing with my career and whatnot. So long story short, I immigrated here when I was really young from Portugal, and my parents had very limited education. So the idea of education as being something that an opportunity that I had, right, that they didn't have, that kind of story was always very present, and definitely sort of shaped this idea of like, hey, if you're going to go to school, I was the first in my family to go to college. If I'm going to do it, like, go all the way, right? Like, just take advantage of this opportunity that they didn't have. And I loved learning about the body. I was like a sociology major, so I just loved sort of understanding, the dynamics of how people interacted and how different influences kind of shaped them. And I thought, okay, medicine sort of kind of hits on both of these, right? Like, you need to have a good understanding of both people and sort of their social world and how that impacts their health. And so I think that's when I kind of started putting all these pieces together. But I'll be totally honest. I think that there was sort of this, I'm not just going to be a social worker, let's say, right? I was a sociology major. I'm not just going to do this or that, but like, let me take advantage of all this training and all this school that I can. And we're going to go all the way, right? That was kind of, I think, a little bit of my mentality.
Wow. How old were you when you moved from Portugal?
I was really young. I was 2.5 maybe, but when we moved here, we didn't have any family here. So I grew up here in sort of this in-between world of being an immigrant whose parents didn't really know or have the support system here, know the language, any of that, but also fully growing up here and not knowing any other world besides this and kind of living in that in-between.
So is there a moment take me into a moment specifically from that time, from being a child to being a sociology major. Was there a moment where you're like, oh, maybe I do want to become a doctor?
I think for me, honestly, so even when I was younger, I would go to my parents to all their doctor visits, right? Things are a little bit different now. We're a little bit better about using translating services and things like that. But when I grew up, I mostly went with my parents to all their visits. And I really noticed how so many of their physical symptoms, because they were pretty young, but they had very labor-intensive jobs. So many of their physical symptoms were not, how should I say? They were really impacted by the stresses that they had going on, right? By the challenges that they were facing, by the type of work that they did, sort of all of these external environmental factors. And I think when a lot of times they would go and they would get a prescription for, here you go, walk out the door, hope your pain feels better. And I remember even at that point feeling so frustrated, I think, with the medical system and saying like, no, like I'm going to be different. Like I'm going to be a doctor because I want to be able to look at somebody as a whole, to understand what is going on in their life, what stressors are going on, what are the other things that are impacting them that goes way beyond just prescribing them something or giving them a diagnosis. And so I think that was really the sort of the accelerator for being like, hey, I want to do both, right? Like I want to understand somebody as a whole, but I also really want to address that health component.
Wow, that's an incredible impetus to want to go in. So it sounds like you were almost acting as a proxy for them or a translator, making sure that everything was flowing smoothly. And just being part of that process, I imagine, built a really strong foundation for you to want to continue and be the difference in this field, which is really cool. So when you then said, okay, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do this thing, go through college, get into med school. Tell me about med school. Is there any times that stick out that were especially challenging for you?
Most of it. I mean, med school in general is hard. I think one of the things that I remember that I don't know if anyone else would have felt this way, but because I did not come from a background or a family that was in this world, really basic things were just new and hard. I remember it being my first year of medical school and other students were talking about Tylenol and ibuprofen and blah, 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 and like using all these terms like and I was just like, I don't know what's what. Like, I don't know the generic and the brand name. Like, I don't, and it was just like all of that was brand new. I mean, I think my parents used aspirin for everything, right? Like everything was aspirin, like take an aspirin, right? And so just really, really basic fundamental things that I think we take for granted now was all new. So I felt like it was just this, they say like the fire hose. Like I felt like it was just like that amount of information that I was taking in. It was a whole new language from the really, really basic beginnings. And so that was really humbling, especially for somebody who obviously, I think a lot of us, you have to excel to get into medical school and do all of that. So it was a very sort of new experience.
Was there ever a point in that process that you thought maybe this wasn't right for you?
That's a really good question. And I'll be honest, I think there definitely were moments that I was like, what am I doing? I'm not sure that this is it. And I kept kind of going back to the why I was doing this in the first place. And I had to remind myself like, hey, this isn't just about learning, the anatomy or the chemical processes that are going on in the kidneys, right? Like I had to always constantly take that step back of like, at the end of the day, I am here because I want to be able to help people and understand what's going on and how that's impacting their health. And I think I was really fortunate because the medical school I was at had this wonderful family medicine program that was basically, it was family and social medicine. And I think that was actually the thing that really kept me going. I think had it just been like, here, pick a specialty, and I hadn't found that sort of social component, I maybe would have struggled more with my decision to continue. But because I had the fortune of being at a school, and that was part of the reason I had chosen, I think I knew somewhat about that I knew I could find people who had sort of similar leanings and were really interested in advocating for patients in that way.
Wow, that's really cool. I imagine that's not the norm. When you say the social aspect of it, like, what do you mean? Give me a little more clarity on what that means as far as how it pertains to a family medicine residency.
Yeah, so a lot of our training was also based on understanding sort of the psychosocial determinants of health and how they were impacting our patients, right? Being able to look at not just their ethnic and cultural backgrounds, but also sort of their socioeconomic backgrounds, right? And their financial concerns and how that was impacting their health and their ability to follow the instructions basically that we're giving them sometimes, right? In regards to their diet, in regards to getting medications, in regards to all of these things and keeping all of that in mind. And I think for me personally, because I did have that background as an immigrant, I also really resonated with a lot of the underserved communities. And that was, I did my training in the Bronx. So there was a lot of ways that I was able to resonate with the population.
That's incredible. I wish that was the standard. It feels like that should be the standard where we combine the art with medicine. Unfortunately, there's some programs that aren't like that I've learned from other doctors. But You know what? I think that's really cool that you got to experience that. So you go on, you finish your residency, and then what happened?
So then I moved kind of closer to where my family was. And I, at that time, got married. I started work as an attending and in a similar population doing work that I really loved with the population I adored. And I started to kind of notice a lot of the same things that I had noticed with my parents, in the sense that a lot of patients were coming to me and they had all these symptoms, aches, pains, whatnot, sort of these vague symptoms. And you do all the workups and everything's always normal, right? And maybe I could get them into physical therapy if they had insurance or if they had the time, right? Maybe I couldn't, whatever it was. And I often would talk to them, right, using a lot of the skills I had learned. And they had just the most unimaginable things going on in their life, right? And it was really clear, like, hey, you're under just incredible stress, right? Chronic stress, things going on for years and years and years. But they didn't always meet the diagnoses for anxiety or depression, right? You would do all these scales and they don't always necessarily meet clinical criteria. And it's hard to even get somebody to see a social worker, even if they do, right? Or the wait's really long. And I would be left kind of like, what do I do? What do I do with these patients who I want to be able to help? I know that they're chronically stressed. I know that that's a big part of why they're having all these symptoms. And yet I feel somewhat handicapped in terms of what to do for them as a physician. And I think that, in addition to then becoming a mom myself, and that sort of triggering my own sort of similar experiences to my patients, where the chronic stress really sort of changed to a level that I wasn't used to or prepared for. I think those two things in combination really were sort of the trigger point for me to be like, I want to learn more about what are other ways that I can really help people to deal with this, to understand that it's not actually normal to be chronically stressed all the time, or that we don't need to consider that normal, right? I think in our society, that's sort of the norm, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed. Like, that's just like, we take that for granted. Like, that's just what it's supposed to be like. And I think I really was coming from this place of like, this isn't what it's supposed to be like all the time, right? And honestly, like, to have a patient who comes in and I just say, oh yeah, you're really stressed, like, bye, I hope that gets better, and not have more that we can do for them was really frustrating. And then, like I said, when I became a mom myself with my first child, I think that was sort of a trigger for me because I struggled on my journey to becoming a mom. And when it finally happened, I felt like I wasn't in a position to really enjoy it. I was so busy, so overwhelmed, so stressed, I had so much going on with work and whatnot that I was sort of missing out on the one thing that I had been so grateful for. So yeah, it's just kind of all came to a head.
Tell me, I want to dive a little bit deeper into it. I want to zoom into this here. So you said you had some trouble, finally were able to conceive and then balancing all these things. Tell me about a time when you just felt overwhelmed with all these things and maybe you identified that something had to change?
Yeah, I will tell you a time that I realized things had to change, and it wasn't when I felt overwhelmed though. I'll
Okay.
explain a second. So I actually had COVID had happened was going on. We were sort of in the thick of COVID, and I lost my job. So a lot of physicians lost their job during that time. And I felt this incredible sense of relief. And I don't know that that's a typical reaction, but I just felt so relieved. And I think that was when I looked back and was able to be like, whoa, I was actually really, really overwhelmed. I was totally burning out. My husband had said to me 1,000 times, like, all you do is work, 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 right? I felt incredible guilt for not spending time with my daughter. So there was a lot that was going, and I think honestly, when I was going through it, I wasn't recognizing it. I think I just, again, sort of thought this is the norm. This is what it has to be. This is what being a doctor is. This is what it means. I have to give. I have to sacrifice. I have to come home late. I have to work at home. I have to do all of these things. I don't think it was until I actually lost my job and felt this profound sense of relief and like, oh my gosh, I finally get a break. I mean, that was literally like the first thought in my head. And then obviously you freak out and all of that. But like, but just the fact that that was my initial reaction was like, whoa, like what signs have I been missing this whole time?
This is why I love doing this podcast, because for you to share that kind of story, like there is no one that is higher educated as far as the pathophysiology of a disease, but as well as the social determinants. If anyone is equipped to prevent themselves becoming overwhelmed, it's someone with that background, yet it still happens, right? And I think that idea and this story should bring comfort to people to say, it's okay to give yourself some grace and maybe identify what's going on and hopefully find the solutions that you need to get out of that situation. So continue the story for me. So you lose your job, you get a sense of relief, you're processing all of these emotions. Then what happens next?
So it was an interesting time because I was like, okay, I've got a little bit of a safety net, luckily, and I was like, what am I going to do? But I think it really affected sort of my identity, right? I mean, I think the first time you go through something like that, again, this was sort of my success, right? Like the thing my parents were so proud of me for being a doctor. Like my whole identity really was shaped around this accomplishment. And so losing my job was a big sort of personal shift that I needed to understand and work through. And then of course I mean, because the universe does what it needs to do to really knock you off your tracks whenever you think like, okay, I'm just going to plan, I'm going to find another job, I'm going to do this thing. I found out about a week later that I was pregnant again with my second. So now I'm unemployed, pregnant with my second. I'm like, how am I ever going to find a job if I'm pregnant? Like no one's going to hire me, right? All these sort of fears, all of these things. But it's interesting because I think that having that time, that's actually when I first hired a coach. I was like, I don't know what to do. I sort of all of this transition, I knew I needed help. I was terrified of ending up in a job where I was going to be burnt out again. I think that was one of my biggest fears. And I was like, this is all I know. What do I do? I did end up hiring a coach who was a physician, and that was life-changing for me. I was able to find another job 3 months before I was due, and they still took me on and they still gave me the job in a very, very different type of environment. At that point, then I was working in a startup, very different worlds from where I came. And I think it just opened my eyes to the fact that like medicine doesn't have to look one way. Everyone I talk to is like, this is how medicine is. It's either academic or it's corporate or whatever it is. And I think having that time to really talk to people, to network, to search. I was like, there are so many different things we can do in medicine that I didn't know. As someone who was fairly a couple of years out of residency, I really wasn't familiar with all these different avenues. So I think that was a huge wake-up call and a blessing to kind of know. And that sort of started my own journey of being like, hey, we don't always need to have things mapped out. We can try things and we can see how they go, and we can learn and talk to people. So then I started this new job, which I loved. It was a total change of pace, fulfilled me in so many ways. And then a couple of years later, I burnt out again. As the cycle goes, I think once you burn out, you're more prone to it, but it doesn't necessarily stop you from even if you recognize the signs, it doesn't necessarily stop it from happening. You just kind of hopefully notice it sooner.
And did you notice it sooner?
I think I did, yeah. I definitely noticed that, okay, a lot of things were sort of changing, things that I loved about the job were changing. And I was starting to feel sort of that like resentful feeling again, that irritation. Anytime someone get added to my schedule, all these things that in the past didn't bother me, but now were bothering me. A lot more work kind of coming home and changing the dynamic at home with my kids, with my husband. When they start calling me out on it, then I know like, oh, I need to pay attention to that, right? So I did. And that was actually when I started thinking about what was missing for me. And that's actually when I started, while I was still working there, I started my coaching business, and I got my certification for that and started taking a lot of courses and things and was doing that side by side.
So when you were in the moment of burnout number 2, right? You're in the job, coming home, it's affecting your personal life, starting to identify some signs of that, which I'm guessing was the catalyst to saying something has to change.
Yeah.
What was that first thing that changed? Or take me into that moment. Was it, what if I'm going to start doing something, it needs to be, I got to start my coaching program? Or what change did you have to make in that moment while you're identifying the burnout?
I think it was the realization that I don't want to spend the next however many years of my life constantly coming back to this position, right? And I needed to be like, I think for a long time I had been like, okay, it's external, right? It's the job. I just need a different setting, a different company, a different this. It was always an external reason for why I was feeling the way I was. I think in that moment, I realized, whoa, this isn't just about the setting. This is about something internally, right? That needs to change. And what is it that I'm missing, right? Like, what am I not getting from my job anymore, from this career or what can I change, right? That would help to kind of buffer some of what I was feeling at the time. So I think that was sort of the catalyst when I realized, like, I can't just expect to get another job and this is gonna be different. Like, I might get another job, it'll be good in the beginning, and then I'm gonna end up back here again. So what else needs to be different? And I think that's when I realized, well, that's kind of when I went back to the coaching, because it's funny, when I had been coached, I remember my coach saying, you should really look into becoming a coach. And at the time, I was like, yeah, no thanks. Like, I was not ready to hear that. I wasn't even ready to consider that as a possibility, because I think I was still very much stuck in that identity of being a doctor. And so it wasn't until sort of the second round of burnout that I was like, wait a minute, like, that's not my entire identity. I want something else. How do I sort of fill that gap and have that opportunity to be creative, to reach people in a different way, to go beyond what medicine allows me to do?
I find it really interesting, and I feel like this happens fairly frequently, is the identity crisis, because you've invested so much time and money into becoming this highly respected professional that it ultimately is going to become part of your identity somewhat. But if it becomes your entire identity, that's where you are really putting yourself in a dangerous place, right? And it sounds
100%.
like this journey for you is saying, there's doctor, but then there's your mom, then you're a wife. There's so many different roles that you're going to play within your life, and choosing which one are going to make up who I am? And realistically, it's a combination of them all, right? And so tell me now, so you're starting to come to that realization, like, I'm more than just a doctor. Like, I can be a coach, I can be a mom, I can be a wife, I can be a friend. And you say, I'm going to go into coaching. What was your ideal client? Like, who did you want to work with when you went into this idea?
I mean, I think if you talk to a lot of coaches, we'll all say sort of the same thing, that we like to coach we like to coach ourselves several years back, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's a big thing for me. So I often work with very type A, high achieving women who look like they have it all together, but are secretly drowning on the inside. And that's very much how I identified myself, where it was like, anybody else would tell you, she's doing amazing, she's got it all together, look at her, right? And inside, I was totally crumbling to pieces. I was like, I can't do all of this. I don't want to do all of this, right? I want to spend time with my kids. I want to have time for myself. I want to enjoy other pursuits. So yes, so definitely the me several years ago, for sure.
So say this woman does, she's a high performer. She comes to you saying, you know what, I feel like I'm suffering, I'm struggling right now. How do you help them in that process?
Yeah, so I think it's a mix of things. A lot of times when women are coming to me, they are not always saying they're burnt out, right? Because as we mentioned, we don't always recognize that. But they're saying, like, I don't have time. I don't have energy. I feel like I'm drowning, right? Those sorts of things. And so part of it is just working on mindset shifts about getting clear on what they really want, right? Not on what everybody else has told them they should want, right? Like being really clear on your own definition of what success looks like and reevaluating that, because I think a lot of times our definition of success is the same definition that we had when we were graduating medical school, right? And it hasn't actually changed. We haven't given ourselves permission to redefine it. But then the other piece, I usually look at it as sort of two components. One is just sort of the practical, logistical things, right? Like, how do we make life simpler? Because especially in today's day and age, I think things are really chaotic for women who are trying to succeed at work and they're trying to be moms and they have to deal with all the pickups and the drop-offs and the extracurriculars and meeting their quotas at work and whatnot. It's like, how do we make that more manageable? How do we make it more sustainable, really, is what the question is. And so there are practical, logistical things that I take my clients through in terms of, like, how do we just take a look at your schedule and how do we figure out how to declutter, right? Declutter our schedule, declutter our mental load. That's a huge, huge part of it, because it's not always just what we have to do, but also what we're thinking about that we have to do all the time. But the other piece that I have found is essential is also how should I say? How do we regulate our nervous system in order to make that work? Because if you're working with physicians or lawyers or any high-achieving woman, right? It doesn't matter the profession. It's not that we don't know what to do, right? I mean, most people who put in 2 minutes to ChatGPT or Google, right? Like, there's a million ways to schedule. There's a million ways to be more productive. There's a million ways to deal with the mental load, right? It's not really information that I think most people need. I think it's the ability to stay consistent when you are exhausted, right? When you are depleted, when you are just, there are demands coming from every possible direction, right? That's the piece that I think makes the biggest difference for women that I work with them on, is in terms of how to regulate your nervous system so that you are able to tolerate more and more stress, because there is a ton of stress, right? To increase that window of tolerance, but also to just recover and come back to baseline and not get derailed by anything, random thing that goes off the rail, right? I can't tell you how many times someone would, when I was really in the peak of burnout, if they would add an extra patient to my schedule and I realized I'd be getting home late, but I had something else to go to, right? And I didn't necessarily have the boundaries put in place, right, that I needed. But it wasn't just the boundaries, it was just the way that I would internally erupt, right? Maybe not externally, because I'd hold it all together. but internally erupt and hold this like resentment and irritation about that situation, rather than being able to be like, okay, how can I deal with this in such a way where it's not overtaking my next patient interaction, right? Like I can still do the work that I need to do. I can set the boundaries that I need to. I can get out of here on time, whatever it is. But that part is not just, here, let me tell you what to do, go do it. That's like, you need to center into your body and you need to be able to regulate those emotions. And that's something I don't think we do enough of, because I think we're just kind of taught, especially in medicine, to keep that to the side. Like that's not something we address, right? That's, you can stuff that down to get the work done. And I think until we start addressing that, it becomes really hard to do the other stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I love this. One thing that you said to me, and this is a term that I've recently become familiar with, is the window of tolerance. And this is something actually with my partner that she's learning in therapy, I'm learning in therapy, that I'll come home and I've learned to ask her if I'm noticing maybe she may be a little irritable, or myself, I ask her, what is your window of tolerance right now? And I'm coming to learn that there are going to be times where that window of tolerance is very small. And then my job is to say, okay, well, how can I best support you right now? Do you need space? Do you need someone to listen to? Like, what does the support look like for you so that that window can open back up again?
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is that when we talk about window of tolerance, my idea of it is it's a continuum, right? There's always going to be times where it's going to decrease down, and there's times where it's going to open up. Is the goal to keep that window of tolerance as wide as possible so we can tolerate as much as possible, or rather finding what is your optimum window?
So the way I think of it is sort of twofold. One is, yes, we want to try to stretch that, right? Because basically it's like, okay, at what point are you going to be so ticked off, right? Like so put over, like you're at your max capacity of stress, right? That you go from being able to actually think logically, get things done, to basically shut down and like you can't deal with it anymore, right? And so as much as we can stretch that, is helpful, right? Because we don't want you to go into that place of shutting down or whatnot. We want you to be able to handle as much as a little bit more, up to whatever is your max capacity. But the other part of it, like you said, is sort of recognizing where you're at on that the continuum, and also being able to kind of bring you back to sort of that baseline regulated place more quickly each time, right? And that's something that comes with a lot of practice, a lot of different tools and techniques and whatnot. But it's sort of like, hey, like my window tolerance is small. I'm sort of at my max capacity, right? Like I'm reaching the edge. And so, yes, you want to make sure other people are aware of that, but also, okay, what can I do personally to bring myself back down to this more like baseline regulated state? And how do I do that more and more quickly each time so that then that window is bigger, right? Like if I'm up here and I can only go this like an inch further till I max out, it's very different than like, hey, I'm able to bring myself back down and now I've got this whole like window to play with again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like, first off, identifying when the window is small. Second is being able to communicate with the people around you, letting them know that that's where you're at. And then third is saying, what do I need to do for myself in order to, find that equilibrium again and in that window of tolerance. Now, for you personally, when your window gets small, what do you do?
Well, I absolutely name it, right? I absolutely name it. I name the emotion that goes with it, right? So it's sort of clear. It's not just like, hey, I'm maxed out, because then using the example with our partners or spouse, my spouse will be like, he'll think he did something wrong, right? And it's like, no, like this is what I'm feeling, this is why. But then it's also sort of being real with myself about what do I have the capacity to handle, right? So if I had a million things on my list for the day, like I may go back through that list and cross off half of them. And that sounds terrifying to do if you've never done that before, right? But you may not be able to do that the first time. The first time you might like cross one thing off for the rest of the day, right? Or be like, I'm taking 5 minutes to myself to go scream into a pillow or go for a walk or blast some music or whatever it is. But again, it's sort of training our bodies really to be able to handle a little bit more and a little bit more each time. And so now when I'm able to recognize that, I'm able to really sit down, be real with myself and be like, okay, what do I need to take off my plate that I don't have the capacity for? And how am I going to bring myself back to a regulated place? So for me, it depends exactly on how I'm feeling. I have a variety of tools. But I think that's another thing to just kind of mention is that a lot of times people think like self-care, right? And self-care, they're like, oh, I need to go to this yoga class or I need to go to the gym or whatever. And then they're like, I can't fit it in. I don't have time for that or whatever it is. And I'm like, self-care is like literally like 2 minutes to step outside and get some fresh air sometimes. Like sometimes that's all you have, especially as a parent, right? If you have little ones or if you're in between patients, right? You don't have time to go do a whole yoga session. What can you do to prime your body, right? To recognize that like you're safe. This is not the end of the world. There's no tiger chasing you in this moment. And to be able to regulate again.
Wow. I imagine having that set of tools available to you and knowing that you have so many things, just like a doctor, right? They have so many different tools that they can utilize in their life for their patients. But now it's identifying what are the tools that I need for myself for when I'm feeling the burnout, the small window of tolerance, and when to apply the specific tool to that situation in order to get out and get yourself into a good headspace again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are going to be many doctors and healthcare professionals who are the type A, who are the high achievers, right? Who are probably experiencing something similar of like what you've explained. If they're listening to this, like, what do you want to say to them?
I think the biggest message that I'd want to get across is to have people recognize that it is, like I said at the beginning with the patients, it applies to us too. It doesn't need to be normal to feel chronically stressed. It really doesn't. You know, that there are actually tools, there are strategies, that are things that you can implement in your day-to-day, both in regards to your environment, right? But also internally, that can make a really big difference in how you're feeling. And I think I would want to empower people to recognize that, yes, maybe, you know, your job sucks, right? Like maybe you're dealing with some pretty serious health issues, or maybe you're caregiving for a loved one who's sick, right? Like maybe you have real, true stressors, right, that are taking up your time and your energy, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't have the power to still make a significant difference for yourself within those experiences. My goal is to help people realize that they can still find almost a certain level of peace and fulfillment and joy and ease, even in the midst of all that chaos, because that chaos is going to be there no matter what. We can't get away from that chronic stress in that sense. Like I can't change your environment for you, but I can absolutely change your internal environment and how you're dealing with what's around you. And I think that I would want people to feel empowered knowing that they can do that.
Those are incredible words of advice there. I think I can just say thank you, because for you to be so transparent, to share your story about your personal struggle and how you've had to come up with your own identity throughout this process as a doctor and a mom and now a coach is really cool. And I imagine that many people that are listening to this are going to be able to relate to that. So if someone is listening, they say, you know what, I would love to check out her coaching or see what she has to offer, or at least reach out to her. What is the best place that they can go?
Sure. So my website is sandrafernandes.com, just my name, but Fernandes is spelled with an S at the end, not a Z. That's the Portuguese spelling. And you can find me on Instagram or TikTok, Sandra Fernandes MD, or shoot me an email. And that's also Sandra@sandrafernandes.com. So.
Well, Dr. Fernandes, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and share your story. I know that a ton of people are going to get some value from this.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. Really, really appreciate it. Loved being here.
Thanks for listening to the MedStory podcast, where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm your host, Spencer Locke, with a special thanks to our executive producer, Shaina May. Our music comes from Blue Dot Sessions and the Descript Audio Library. The MedStory podcast is made possible by MedStory Studios and listeners like you. So if you'd like to support us, please leave a review. It means more than. And if you have a story to share or want to produce a podcast of your own, reach out to us at info@medstorymedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode.